Hi, everybody. This is Allison from Alley Creations. How are you? Please hit that like button. It's not hard. Just click. Subscribe if you haven't done so, and share away. You never know. We're in a time where there is a lot of people who are very well read, right? And then there's a lot of people who are not. That's the population I'm trying to reach. And if you like the work as much as I like the work, then you want to spread the work. And sometimes it's not necessarily through you plugging a book, because I can plug a million books to people. Not all of them are going to resonate, but a lot of people like, try sharing. It's not hard. And if you get anything from my work, a connected dot, an epiphany, a mind blown moment, a new book to read, a new author to explore, please consider supporting my work. And all the links are at the bottom of this video. Blavatsky. Your Secret Doctrine. It's brilliant. Before I even begin, I'm reading another very small Manly P. Hall book. And it's quite interesting how I, the other day, did the Alien Gray Agenda, and I'm connecting the dots with this guy, Ashiana Dean, Urantia, and the Oaspe book. But now with this work, Manly P. Hall and Blavatsky have beautiful resonance with each other because a lot of their work correlates. And then Harriet Augusta Curtis, who does the Keys to Destiny, almost all the books, Realms of the Living Dead, all those books, has a love for Blavatsky. So they're all intermingling their thinking together through their books. And a lot of them quote each other. It's brilliant to see how people bounce off other people's concepts but run away with it in their own way, in their own perception. So it's really awesome to see all these people intermingling their work. Even if you don't agree with them, it's interesting. As my teeth are about to fall out. Before I get into this section, I do apologize for any mispronunciations. See that little gap right there? My teeth can just pop out at any moment, and I have projection issues because of it. So please bear with me. I'm also dyslexic and I read fast at times. This book has already been butchered by me in several instances, so I do my best. The lotus as a universal symbol. Try to make this a smidgen bigger. Hang on. Sorry, guys. There we go. Now I can see. There are no ancient symbols without a deep and philosophical meaning attached to them, their importance and significance increasing with their antiquity. Such is the lotus. It is the flower sacred to nature and her gods, and represents the abstract and the concrete universe, standing as the emblem of the productive powers of both spiritual and physical nature. It was held sacred from the remotest antiquity by the Aryan Hindus, the Egyptians, and the Buddhists after them, revered in China and Japan, and adopted as a Christian emblem by the Greek and Latin churches, who made of it a messenger, as the Christians do now, who replace it with the water lily. It had still has its mystical meaning, which is identical with every nation on the earth. We refer the reader to Sir William Jones. With the Hindus, the lotus is the emblem of the productive power of nature through the agency of fire and water, spirit and matter. Eternal, says a verse in the Bhagavad Gita. I see Brahm, the creator enthroned in three above the lotus. And Sir W. Jones shows a noted in the stanzas that the seeds of the lotus contain, even before they germinate, perfectly formed leaves, the miniature shape of what one day, as perfected plants, they will become. The lotus in India is a symbol of prolific earth and what is more of Mount Meru. The four angels or genii of the four quarters of heaven, the Maharajas, see stanzas, stand each on a lotus. The lotus is a twofold type of the divine and the human hermaphrodite, being of dual sex, so to say. The spirit of fire or heat, which stirs up, fructifies, and develops into concrete form everything from its ideal prototype, which is born of water or primordial earth, evolved Brahma with the Hindus. The lotus flower, represented as growing out of Vishnu's navel, that God resting on the waters of space and his serpent of infinity, is most graphic allegory ever made. The universe evolving from the essential sun, the point, the ever concealed germ. Lakshmi, who is the female aspect of Vishnu, and who is also called Padma, the lotus is likewise shown floating at creation on a lotus flower, and during the churning of the ocean, a space springing from the sea of milk, like Venus from the trough. Then seated on a lotus, beauty's bright goddess, peerless Suri, arose out of the waves, sings in English Orientalist, I got it out, and poet Sir Monier Williams. The underlying idea in this symbology is very beautiful, and it shows, furthermore, its identical parentage in all the religious systems. Whether in the lotus or water lily shape, it signifies one and the same philosophical idea, namely the emanation of the objective from the subjective, divine ideation passing from the abstract into the concrete or visible form. For as soon as darkness, or rather that which is darkness, for ignorance, has disappeared in its own realm of eternal light, leaving behind itself only its divine manifested ideation, the creative logi have their understanding open, and they see in the ideal world, hereto concealed in the divine thought, the archetypal forms of all, and proceed to copy and build or fashion upon these models forms evanescent and transcendent. At the stage of action, the demiurge is not yet the archetype. Born in the twilight of action, he has yet to first perceive the plan to realize the ideal form, which lie buried in the bosom of eternal ideation, as the future lotus leaves, the immaculate petals, are concealed within the seed of the plant. Transformation into the lotus A head emerging from this flower, the god exclaims, I am the pure lotus emerging from the luminous one. I carry the message of Horus. I am the pure lotus which comes from the solar fields. The lotus idea may be traced even in the Elohistic chapter, the first of Genesis, as stated in Isis. It is in this idea that we must look for the origin and explanation of the verse in the Jewish cosmogony, which reads, quote, and God said, let the earth bring forth the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself, end quote. In all the primitive religions, the Son of the Father is the creative God, his thought made visible, and before the Christian era, from the Trimurti, sorry if I'm butchering that, of the Hindus down to the three Kabbalistic heads of the scriptures, as explained by the Jews, the triune Godhead of each nation was fully defined and substantiated in its allegories. Such is the cosmic and ideal significance of the great symbol with the Eastern peoples, but applied to practical and exoteric worship, which had also its esoteric symbology, the lotus became in time the carrier and container of a more terrestrial idea. No dogmatic religion has ever escaped the sexual element in it, and to this day it soils the moral beauty of the root idea. The following is quoted from the same Kabbalistic MSS already mentioned. Quote, pointing to the signification was the lotus growing in the waters of the Nile. Its mode of growth particularly fitted it as a symbol of generative activities. The flower of the lotus, which is the bearer of the seed of reproduction as a result of its maturing, is connected by its placenta-like attachment with Mother Earth, or the womb of Isis, through the water of the womb that is the river Nile, by means of the long cord-like stalk, the umbilicus. Nothing can be plainer than the symbol. And to make it perfect in its intended signification, a child is sometimes represented as a seated in or issuing from the flower. Thus Osiris and Isis, the children of Kronos, or time without end in the development of their nature forces, in this picture become the parents of man under the name Horus. We cannot lay too great stress upon the use of generative function as a basis for a symbolical language and a scientific art speech. Thought upon the idea leads at once to reflection upon the subject of creative cause. In its workings, nature is observed to have fashioned a wonderful piece of living mechanism governed by an added living soul, the life development and history of which soul as to whence it presents, and its weather surpasses all efforts of the human intellect. The newborn is an ever-reoccurring miracle, as evidence that within the workshop of the womb, an intelligent creative power has intervened to fasten a living soul to a physical machine. The amazing wonderfulness of the fact attaches a holy sacredness to all connected with the organs of reproduction as the dwelling place of evident constructive intervention of the deity, end quote. It's pretty spot on. This is a correct rendering of the underlying ideas of old, of the purely pantheistic conceptions, impersonal and revental of the archaic philosophers of the prehistoric ages. Not so much, however, when applied to sinful humanity, to the gross ideas attached to personality. Therefore, no pantheistic philosopher would fail to find the remarks that follow the above, and which represents the anthropomorphism of Judean symbology, other than dangerous for the sacredness of true religion, and fitting only our materialistic age, which is the direct outcome and result of the anthropomorphic character. For this is a keynote to the entire spirit and essence of the Old Testament. Therefore goes on MSS, treating of the symbolism of art speech of the Bible. Quote, the locality of the womb is to be taken as the most holy place, the sanctum sanctorum, and the venerable temple of the living God. With man, the possession of the woman has always been considered as essential part of himself, to make one out of two and jealousy guarded as sacred. Even the part of the ordinary house or home consecrated to the dwelling of the wife was called sorry guys, these are in italics, penetralia, the secret or sacred, and hence metaphor of holy of holies, and sacred constructions taken from the idea of the sacredness of the organs of generation. Carried to the extreme of description by metaphor, this part of the house is described in the sacred books as the between the thighs of the house, and sometimes the idea is carried out constructively in the great door opening of churches, placed inward between flanking buttresses. End quote. No such thought carried to the extreme ever existed among the old primitive Aryans. This is proven by the fact that in the Vedic period, their women were not placed apart from men in penetralia or zyanas. Their seclusion began with the Mohammedans, the next heirs to Hebrew symbolism after Christian ecclesiasticism had conquered the land and gradually enforced their ways and customs upon the Hindus. The pre and post Vedic woman was a free as man, and no impure terrestrial thought was ever mixed with the religious symbolism of the early Aryans. The idea and applications are purely Semitic. This is corroborated by the writer of the said intensely learned and Kabbalistic revelation himself, when he closes the above quote passages by adding, quote, if to those organs as symbols of creative cosmic agencies, the idea of the origin of measure as well as of time periods can be attached, then indeed in the constructions of the temples of dwellings of deity or of Jehovah, that part designed as the Holy of Holies or the most holy place should borrow its title from the recognized sacredness of the generative organs, considered as symbols of measure as well as creative cause. With the ancient wise, there was no name and no idea and no symbol of first cause, end quote. Most decidedly not, rather never give a thought to it and leave it for ever nameless, as the early pantheists did. Then degrade the sacredness of the ideal of ideals by dragging down its symbols into such an anthropomorphic forms. Here again, one perceives the immense chasm between Aryan and Semitic religions, thought, two opposite poles, sincerity and concealment. With the Brahmins, who had never invested with an original sin element, the nature procreative functions of mankind, it is a religious duty to have a son. A Brahmin in days of old, having accomplished his mission of human creator, retired to the jungle and passed the rest of his days in religious meditations. He had accomplished his duties to nature as mortal man and its co-worker, and henceforth gave all its thoughts to the spiritual immortal portion in himself, regarding the terrestrial as mere illusion, an ever-escent dream, which it is. With the Semite, it was different. He invented a temptation of flesh in a Garden of Eden, showed his God, esoterically, the tempter and the ruler of nature, cursing forever an act which was the logical program of that nature. All this exoterically, as in the cloak and dead letter of Genesis and the rest, and all at the same time esoterically, he regarded the supposed sin and fall as an act of sacred, as to choose the organ, the penetrator of the original sin, as the fittest and most sacred symbol to represent that God, who is shown as branding its entering into function as disobedience and everlasting sin. Whoever can fathom the paradoxical depths of the Semitic mind, and this paradoxical element minus its innermost significance, has now passed entirely into Christian theology and dogma. Truth. Whether the early fathers of the church knew the esoteric meaning of the Hebrew Old Testament, or whether only a few of them were aware of it, while the others remained ignorant of the secret, it is posterity to decide. One thing is certain at any rate, as the esotericism of the New Testament agrees perfectly with that of the Hebrew Mosaic books, and sits at the same time a number of purely Egyptian symbols and pagan dogmas in general, the Trinity, for example, have been copied by and incorporated into the synopsis and St. John. It becomes evident that the identity of these symbols was known to the writers of the New Testament, whoever they were. They must have been aware also of the priority of the Egyptian esotericism, since they have adopted several such symbols that typify purely Egyptian conceptions and beliefs in their outwards and inward meaning, and which are not to be found in the Jewish canon. One of such is the water lily in the hands of the archangel and early representations of his appearance to the Virgin Mary, and these symbolical images are preserved to this day in the iconography of Greek and Roman churches. Thus, water, fire, the cross, as well as a dove, the lamb, and other sacred animals, with all their combinations, yield esoterically an identical meaning and must have been accepted as an improvement upon Judaism, pure and simple. It's true, though, if you think about it, and you do the work in the art history department, and you do see in a lot of the Greek and Latin works from that time, there is water lilies. But the lotus and water are among the oldest symbols, and in their origin are purely Aryan, though they became common property during the branching off of the fifth race. Let us give an example. Letters, as much as numbers, are all mystic, whether in combinations or each taken separately. The most sacred of all is the letter M. It is both feminine and masculine, or androgyny, and is made to symbolize water, the great deep, in its origin. It's a mystic in all the languages, Eastern and Western, and stands as a glyph for the waves. Thus or like Aquarius. In the Aryan esotericism, as in the Semitic, the letter has always stood for the waters. In Sanskrit, Makara, the 10th sign of the zodiac, means a crocodile, or rather an aquatic monster associated always with water. The letter MA is equivalent to and corresponds with the number 5, composed of a binary, the symbol of the two sexes separated, and of the ternary symbol of the third life, the progeny of the binary. This again is often symbolized by a pentagon, the latter being a sacred sign, a divine monogram. Mitra, sorry guys, is the secret name of the fifth Buddha and the Karaki avatar of Brahmins, the last Messiah who will come at the culmination of the great cycle. It is also an initial letter of the Greek metis, or divine wisdom, of Mimra, the word or logos, and of Mithras, the monad, mystery. All these are born in and from the great deep and are the sons of Maya, the mother in Egypt, mouth. In Greece, Minerva, divine wisdom, Mary or Miriam, Mira, of the mother of the Christian logos, and of Maya, the mother of Buddha. Is that a D? Madhava and Maratha are the titles of the most important gods and goddesses of the Hindu pantheon. Finally, mandala is in Sanskrit a circle or an orb, the 10 divisions of Rig Veda. The most sacred names in India began with the letter generally from Mahat, the first manifested intellect, and Mandara, the great mountain used by the gods to churn the ocean, down to Madakin, the heavenly Ganges, Manu. Shall this be called a coincidence? Well, there is none. A strange one it is, then, indeed, when we find even Moses found in the waters of the Nile having the symbolical consonant in his name, and the Pharaoh's daughter called him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water. Besides which, the Hebrew sacred name of God applied to this letter M is Morach, the holy or blessed, and the name for the water of the flood is Mabul. A reminder of the three Maris at the crucifixion and their connection with the Mar, the sea, or water, may close this example. This is why in Judaism and Christianity, the Messiah is always connected with water, baptism, the fishes, the sign of the zodiac called Min in Sanskrit, and even with the Matsya, fish, avatar, and the lotus, the symbol of the womb, or the water lily, which is the same. In the relics of ancient Egypt, the greater antiquity of the votive symbols and emblems of objects exhumed, the oftener are the lotus flowers and the water found in connection with the solar gods. The god Karum, the moist power, water, as Thales taught it, being the principle of all things, sits on the throne enshrined in a lotus. The god Bes stands on a lotus ready to devour his progeny. Thought, the god of mystery and wisdom, the sacred scribe of Amenti, wearing the solar disk as headgear, sits with a bull's head, the sacred bull of Mendes, being a form of thought, and a human body on all full-blown lotus. Finally, it is the goddess Hirquit, under her shape of a frog who rests on the lotus, thus showing her connection with water. And it is the frog symbol, undeniably the most ancient of the Egyptian deities, from whose unpoetical shape the Egyptologists have been vainly trying to unravel her mystery and functions. Its adoption in the church by the early Christians shows that they knew it better than our modern Orientalists. The frog or toad goddess was one of the chief cosmic deities connected with creation on account of her amphibious nature, and chiefly because her apparent resurrection after long ages of solitary life, enshrined in old walls and rocks. She not only participated in the organization of the world together with Karum, I don't know if I'm saying that name right, but was also connected with the dogma of resurrection. There must have been some very profound and secret meaning attached to these symbols, since notwithstanding the risk of being charged with a disgusting form of zoolatry, the early Egyptian Christians adopted in their churches a frog or a toad enshrined in a lotus flower, or simple without the latter emblem, was the form chosen for the church lamps, on which were engraved the words, I am the resurrection. These frog goddesses are also found in all the mummies. Pretty interesting. The last section I'm going to read today. The moon, Deus, Lunus, Phoebe, which happens to be my birth mother's name. Interesting. Sorry, guys. This archaic symbol is the most poetical of all symbols, as also the most philosophical. The ancient Greeks brought it into prominence, and the modern poets have worn it there threadbare. The Queen of Night, writing in her majesty of her peerless light in heaven, throwing all, even Hesperos, into darkness and spreading her silver mantle over the whole sidereal world, has ever been a favorite theme with all the poets of Christendom, from Milton and Shakespeare down to the latest versifier. But the refulgent lamp of night, with her suite of stars unnumbered, spoken only to the imagination of the profane, until lately, religion and science has naught to do with the beautiful mythos, yet the cold chaste moon, she, in the words of Shelley, who makes all beautiful on which she smiles, the wondering shrine of soft yet icy flame, which ever is transformed yet still the same, and warms but not illumes, stands in close relations to earth than any other sidereal orb. The sun is the giver of life to the whole planetary system. The moon is the giver of life to our globe. And the early races understood and knew it, even in their infancy. She is the queen and she is the king, and was King Soma before she became transformed into Phoebe and the chaste Diana. She is preeminently the deity of the Christians through the Mosaic and Kabbalistic Jews, though the civilized world may have remained ignorant of the fact for long ages, and the fact ever since the last initiated father of the church died, carrying with him into his grave the secrets of the pagan temples. For the fathers such as Origen or Clemens, Alexandrius, the moon was Jehovah's living symbol, the giver of life and the giver of death, the disposer of being in our world. For if Artemis was Luna in heaven, and with the Greeks, Diana on earth, who presided over childbirth and life, with the Egyptians, she was Hecate, in hell, the goddess of death, who ruled over magic and enchantments. More than this, as the personified moon, whose phenomena as triadic, Diana, Hecate, Luna, is the 3 in 1, for she is Diva, Transformis, Turgemia, Triceptus, 3 heads on 1 neck, like Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Hence, she is a prototype of our Trinity, which has not always been entirely male. The number 7, so prominent in the Bible, so sacred in the 7th Sabbath day, came to the Jews from antiquity, deriving its origin from the fourfold number 7, contained in the 28 days of the lunar month, each septenary portion thereof being typified by 1/4 of the moon. It is worth the trouble of presenting in this work a bird's eye view of the origin and development of the lunar myth and the worship in historical antiquity on our side of the globe. Its early origin is untraceable by exact science, rejecting as it does tradition, while for theology, which under the guidance of a crafty pope has put a brand on every fragment of literature that does not bear the imprimatur of the Church of Rome. Its archaic history is a sealed book. Whether the Egyptian or the Aryan Hindu religious philosophy is a more ancient, and Secret Doctrine says it is the latter, does not much matter in this instance, as the lunar and solar worship are the most ancient in the world. Both have survived and prevailed to this day throughout the whole world, with some openly, with others in the Christian symbolics secretly. The cat, a lunar symbol, was sacred to Isis, herself the moon, in one sense, as Osiris was the sun. The cat is often seen on the top of the sistrum in the hand of the goddess. sorry guys, my eyes. This animal was held in great veneration in the city of Budapest, which might, sorry guys, which went into the deep mourning after the death of every sacred cat, because Isis, as the moon, was particularly worshipped in the city of mysteries. The astronomical symbolism connected with it had already been given in section 1 of symbolism, and no one has better described it than Mr. G. Massey in his lectures and in the Natural Genesis. The eye of the cat, it is said, seems to follow the lunar phases in its growth and decline. Its orb shined like two stars in the darkness of night. Hence the mythological allegory which shows Diana hiding under the shape of a cat in the moon. When in company with other deities, she was seeking to escape the pursuit of Typhoon. The moon in Egypt was both the eye of Horus and the eye of Osiris, the sun. The same with the Xenophilus. I'm not saying that right. As I've said in the beginning, the dog-headed ape was a glyph to symbolize the sun and moon in turn, though it is more of a hermetic than a religious symbol, for it is the hieroglyphic of the Mercury, the planet, as Mercury of the alchemical philosophers, as, say, the alchemists. Mercury has to be even nearer to Isis as her minister, as without Mercury, neither Isis nor Osiris can accomplish anything to the great work. Xenophilus, however you pronounce that, whenever represented with the caduceus, the crescent, or the lotus in a glyph of the philosophical Mercury, but when seen with a reed or a roll of parchment, he stands for Hermes, the secretary and advisor of Isis, as Hanuman filled the same office with Rama. I am butchering names today. Though the regular sun worshippers, the priests, are few, yet none only in the bulk of the Hindu mythology and history based upon and interblended with these two worships, but so is also the Christian religion itself. From their origin down to the modern day, it has colored the theologies of both the Roman Catholic and the Protestant churches. The differences in between the Aryan Hindu and the Aryan European faiths is very small, if only the fundamental idea of both are taken into consideration. Hindus are proud of calling themselves Suras, and I'm not even attempting that, of solar and lunar dynasties, so fill that blank in. The Christians pretend to regard it as idolatry, and yet they adhere to a religion entirely based upon the solar and lunar worships. It is useless and vain for the Protestants to exclaim against the Roman Catholics for their Mariolatry, based on the ancient cult of lunar goddess, when they themselves worship Jehovah, preeminently a lunar god, and when both churches have accepted in their theologies the Son, Christ, and the lunar trinity. What is known of Chaldean moon worship, of the Babylonian god Sin, called by the Greeks Deus Lunus, is very little, and that little is apt to mislead the profane student who fails to grasp the esoteric significance of the symbols, as popularly known to the ancient profane philosophers and writers. For those who were initiated were pledged to silence. The Chaldea was the worshippers of the moon under her and his various names, just as were the Jews who came after them. In the unpublished MSS on the art speech already mentioned, given a key to the formation of ancient symbolical language, logical reason, deity, is brought forward for the double worship. It is written by a wonderful, well-informed, and acute scholar and mystic who gives in the comprehensive form of hypothesis. The later, however, becomes forcibly a proven fact in the history of religious evolution and human thought to anyone who has ever had a glimpse into the secret of ancient symbology. Thus he says, quote, "One of the first occupations among men connected with those of actual necessity would be the perception of time, periods marked on the vaulted arc of the heavens sprung and rising over the level floor of the horizon or the plane of still water. These would come to be marked on those of the days and nights, of the phases of the moon, or of its stellar or synodic revolutions, of the period of the solar year, with reoccurrence of the seasons and with the application to such periods of the natural measure of day and night, or of the day divided into the light and the dark. It would also be discovered that there was a longest and shortest solar day and 2 solar days of equal day and night within the period of the solar year, and the points of the year of these could be marked with the greatest precision in the starry groups of the heavens or the constellations, subject to that retrograde movement thereof, which in time would require a correction by incalculation, as was the case in the deception of the flood, where correction of 150 days was made for the period of 600 years, during which confusion of landmarks had increased. This would naturally come to pass with all races in time, and such knowledge must be taken to have been inherent in the human race prior to what we call the prehistoric history, the historic period." End quote. Sorry, guys. On the basis, the author seeks for some natural physical function possessed in common by the human race and connected with the periodical manifestations, such that the connection between the two kinds of phenomena become fixed in popular usage. He finds it in the feminine physiological phenomena every lunar month of 28 days or 4 weeks of 7 days. Each of that 13 occurrences of the period should happen in 364 days, which is the solar week year of 52 weeks, 7 days each. The quickening of the photis is marked by a period of 126, sorry guys, days are 18 weeks and 7 days each. The period, which is called the period of viability, is one of 210 days or 30 weeks of 7 days each. The period of parturition is accomplished in 280 days or a period of 40 weeks of 7 days each, of 10 lunar months of 28 days each, or of 9 calendar months of 31 days each, counting on the royal arc of heavens, for the measure of the period of traverse from the darkness of the womb to the light and glory of conscious existence, that continuing inscrutable mystery and miracle. Thus, the observed periods of time marking the workings of the birth function would naturally become a basis of astronomical calculation. We may also affirm that this was the mode of reckoning among all nations, either independently or intermediately and indirectly by tuition. It was the mode with the Hebrews, for even today the calendar by means of a 354 and 355 of the lunar year, and we possess a special evidence that it was the mode with the ancient Egyptians, as to which this is the proof. The basic idea underlying the religious philosophy of the Hebrews was that God contained all things within himself, and that man was his image, man including women. The place of the man and woman with the Hebrews was among the Egyptians occupied by the bull and the cow, sacred to Osiris and Isis, who were represented respectively by man having a bull's head and a woman having the head of a cow, which symbols were worshipped. Notoriously, Osiris was the sun and the river Nile, the tropic year of 365 days, which number is the value of the word Nelios, the bull, and he was also the principle of fire and of life-giving force, which Isis was moon, the bed of the river Nile, or the mother earth, for the pertinent energies, of which water was a necessity, the lunar year of 354 days, 364 days, the time maker of the periods of gestation, and the cow marked by or with the crescent new moon. But the use of the cow of the Egyptians for the women of the Hebrews was not intended as any radical difference of signification, but our occurrence in the teachings intended and merely as substitution as a symbol of common import, which was this vice. The period of perpetuation with the cow and the woman was held to be the same, or 280 days, or 10 lunar months of 4 weeks each. And in this period consisted the essential value of the animal symbol, whose marked was of the crescent moon. This I can't get this word out of my mouth. Whatever, and natural periods are found to have been subjects of symbolism all over the world. They are thus used by the Hindus and are found to be most plainly set forth by the ancient Americans in the Richardson ingest tablets in the Plenty Cross, and manifestly lay at the base of the formation of the calendar, forms the Mayas of the Yucatan and Hindus, the Assyrians, and the ancient Babylonians, as well as the Egyptians and Old Hebrews. The natural symbols would be either the phallus or the phallus of Yoni, male or female. Indeed, the words translate by the generalizing terms male and female in the 27th verse of the first chapter of Genesis are can't get those italics out, guys, or literally phallus and Yoni. While representations of the phallic emblems would barely indicate the genital members of the human body, when their functions and development of the seed vessels emanating from them were considered, then would come into indication a mode of measures of lunar time and through lunar or solar time. This is the physiological or anthropomorphal key to the moon symbol, the key that opens the mystery of theogony, or the evolution of the monovrandric gods, is more complicated and has nothing phallic in it. All the mystical and divine there, but the Jews, beyond connecting Jehovah directly with the moon as a generative god, preferred to ignore the higher hierarchies and have made some of them zodiacal constellations and planetary gods. Their patriarchs, thus humorizing the purely theosophical idea and dragging it down to the level of sinful humanity, the MSS, from which the above is extracted, explains very clearly to what hierarchy of gods Jehovah belonged and who this Jewish god was, for it shows in clear language that which the writer has always insisted upon, namely, that the God with which the Christians have burdened themselves with no better than the lunar symbol of the reproductive or generative faculty in nature. They have ever ignored even the Hebrew secret God of the Kabbalists, Ein Sof, as grand as Parabrahman in the earliest Kabbalistic and mystical conceptions, but it is not the Kabbalah or Rosenroth that can ever give the true original teachings of Simon ben Ikai as metaphysical and philosophical as any. And how many are these among the students of the Kabbalah who knew anything of them except in their distorted Latin translations? Let us glance at the idea which led the ancient Jews to adopt a substitute for the ever unknowable and which has misled the Christians into mistaking the substitute for the reality. Quote, if to these organs, phallus and yoni, as symbols of creative cosmic agencies, the idea of time periods can be attached, then indeed, in the construction of temples as dwellings of deity or Jehovah, that post designated as the Holy of Holies or the Most High Place should borrow its title from the recognized sacredness of the generative organs, considered as symbols of the measure as well as a creative cause, end quote. Quote, with the ancient wise, there was no name and no idea and no symbol of the first cause. With the Hebrews, the indirect conception of such was couched in a term of negation of comprehension, and so, or without bounds. But the symbol of the first comprehensible manifestation was the conception of a circle with its diameter line, to carry at once a geometric, phallic, and astronomical idea, for the one takes its birth from the knot or the circle, without which it could not be, and from one, or a primordial one, spring the 9 digits in geometrically all plane shapes. So in the Kabbalah, the circle with its diameter line in the picture of the 10 Sephiroth, or emanations composing the Adam Kadmon, the archetypical man, the creative origin of all things. This idea connecting the circle and its diameter line, that is number 10, with the signification of the reproductive organs and the most high holy place, was carried out constructively in the king's chamber or holy of holies of the great pyramid in the tabernacle of Moses, and in the holy of holies of the temple of Solomon. It is the picture of a double womb, for in Hebrew the letter He is at the same time the number 5 in the symbol of the womb, and twice 5 is 10, or the phallic number. This double womb also shows the duality of the idea carried from the highest spiritual down to the lowest of terrestrial plane, and by the Jews limited to the latter. With them, therefore, the number 7 has acquired the most prominent place in their exoteric religion, a cult of external forms and empty rituals. As their Sabbath, for instance, the 7th day sacred to their deity, the moon symbolical of regenerative Jehovah. While with other nations, the number 7 was typical of theologic evolution of cycles, cosmic planes, and the 7 forces of occult powers in cosmos, as a boundless whole whose first upper triangle was unreachable to the finite intellect of man, while other nations, therefore, busied themselves in the forcible limitation of cosmos in space and time only with a septenary manifested plane. The Jews centered this member solely in the moon and based all their sacred calculations thereon. Hence, we find the thoughtful author of the MSS, just quoted remarkably in reference in the metrology of the Jews, that if 20,612 be multiplied by 4/3, the product will afford a base for the ascertainment of the main revolution of the moon. And if this product be again multiplied by 4/3, this continued product will afford a base for finding the exact period of the mean solar year. This form becoming, for the finding of astronomical periods of time, a great service. This double number, male and female, is symbolized also in some well-known idols. Iswara, the Isis of the Hindus, Idranus, or Ardan of the Hebrew Jordan, Rosetta of descent. She is standing on a lotus leaf. Sorry, guys, with my allergies, flowing on the water, but the signification is that it is androgyny or hermaphrodite or a hermaphrodite that is phallus and yoni combined. The number 10, the Hebrew letter Yad, the containment of Jehovah. She, or rather he, gives the minutes of the same circle of 360 degrees. Jehovah, in its best aspect, is Binah, the upper meditating mother, the great sea or Holy Spirit. Therefore, rather a synonym of Mary, the mother of Jesus, that of his father, that mother being the Latin mare, the sea, is here also Venus, the stellar del mar, or star of the sea. The ancestors of the mysteries, Arcadians, the Chandra, or I can't stand this book with the italics. I can't see it. The lunar kings, whom tradition shows reigning at Prayag ages before our era, have come from India and brought with them the worship of the forefathers of Soma and his son Buddha, which afterwards became that of the Chaldeans. Yet such admiration, apart from the popular astrology and heliolatry, was no sense idolatry. No more, at any rate, in the modern Roman Catholic symbolism, which connects their Virgin Mary, the Magna Mater of the Syrians and the Greeks, with the moon. Of this worship, the most pious Roman Catholics feel quite proud and loudly confess to it. In a memoir to the French Academy, the Marquise de Marville says, "It is only natural that, as an unconscious prophecy, Amun-Ra should be his mother's husband, since the Magna Mater of Christians is precisely the spouse of that son she conceives. We Christians can understand now why Netheus throws radiance on the sun while remaining the moon, since the Virgin, who is the Queen of Heaven, as Neith was, clothes herself in her radiance, and clothes in the turn as Christ's Son, is sung by the Roman Catholics during the service." And he adds, can't read that Latin, and I apologize. "We Christians understand also how it is the famous inscription at Sais should have stated that none has ever lifted my veil, considering that this sentence, literally translated, is the summary of what is sung in the church of the day of the Immaculate Conception. Surely nothing could be more sincere than this. It justifies entirely what Mr. Gerard Massey has said in the lecture on Lunatra." These words are killing me. Something with the Luna, ancient and modern. I'm getting so frustrated. And I do apologize. And if my dumb American white ass would have a translator to say it without my teeth flying out, I would. Before I move on, that word I can't pronounce, I can't find it to help me project it out. So it's one of these words that is probably from another religion and butchered. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm not nuts, because I just tried. It's bothering me. Tried finding the pronunciation that maybe if I can project it, I will. It's not here to project. It's one of those made up words. Moving on. The man in the moon, Osiris Soot, Jehovah Satan, Christ Judas, and other lunar twins, is often charged with bad conduct In the lunar phenomena, the moon was one as the moon, which was twofold in sex and threefold in character as mother, child, and adult male. Thus, the child of the moon became the consort of his own mother. It could not be helped if there was to be any reproduction. He was compelled to be his own father. Thus, relationships were reputed by later sociology, and the primitive man in the moon got tabooed. Yet it is latest, most inexplicable phase this has become the central doctrine of the grossest superstition the world has seen. For these lunar phenomena and their humanly represented relationships, the incestuous included, are the very foundations of the Christian Trinity and unity. Through ignorance of symbolism, the simple representation of early day has become the most profound religious mystery in modern Allylatry. I'm going to try that. I have to break it down. The Roman Church, without being in any wise ashamed of the proof, portrays the Virgin Mary array with the sun and horned moon at her feet, holding the lunar infant in her arms as child and consort of the mother moon. The mother, child, and adult male are fundamental. In this way, it can be proved that our Christology is mummified mythology and legendary lore, which has been palmed off upon us in the Old Testament and the New as divine revelation uttered by the very voice of God. A charming allegory is found in the Zohar, one which unveils better than anything ever did the true character of Jehovah. In the primitive conception of the Hebrew Kabbalists, it's now found in the I can't even read right now. The philosophy of Ibn Gerbal's Kabbalah, translated by Isaac Meyer, in the introduction written by R. Hezquiah, which is very old, says our author, and forms part of the Brody edition of the Zohar, is an account of a journey taken by R. El-Azar, son of R. Shimon B. Ionhai. What the fuck? And Rabbi Abba. They met a man with a heavy burden and asked his name, but he refused to give it and proceeded to explain to the Torah law. They asked, "Who caused thee thus to walk and carry such a heavy load?" He answered, "The letter Yod," which equals 10 and is the symbolical letter of Kether and the essence of germ of holy name, Yadvai Vadvai. They said to him, "If thou wilt tell us the name of thy father, we will kiss the dust of thy feet." He replied, "As my father, he has his dwelling in the great sea and was a fish therein, like Vishnu and Dagon, or Onans, which first destroyed the great sea, and he was great and mighty in ancient days until he swallowed all the other fishes in the great sea." R. El-Azar listened and said to him, "Thou art the son of the holy flame. Thou art the son of Rab Ham Sabah. The fish in Aramaic or Chaldee in Nun Noon. Thou art the son of the light of the Torah Dharma." Then the author explains that the feminine Sitharoth, Binah, is termed by the Kabbalists the Great Sea. Therefore, Binah, whose divine name as Jehovah Yah and Elohim is simply the Chaldean Tiamat, the female power, the Thyalith of Borosos, who presides over the chaos and was made out later by Christian theology to be the serpent and the devil. He, Yahovah, is a supernal he and Eve. This Yahovah, then, or Jehovah, is identical with the chaos father, mother, son. on the maternal plane, and in the purely physical world, demon and Deus at one and the same time, the sun and moon, good and evil, God and demon. Lunar magnetism generates life, preserves and destroys it, psychically as well as physically. And if astronomically, she is one of the 7 planets of the ancient world, and theogony, she is one of the regions thereof, with Christians now as much as the pagans, the former referring to her under the name of one of their archangels, and later under the one of their gods. Therefore, the means of the fairy tale translated by Chowulson from an old Chaldean MSS, translated into Arabic about Qutemi being instructed by the idol of the moon, is easily understood. Selenius tells us the secret, as well as Maimonides, the worshippers of Teraphim, the Jewish oracles, carved images and claimed that the light of the principal stars, planets, permeated these through and through the angelic virtue or regions of the stars and planets, conversed with them, teaching them many most useful things and arts. And Selenius explains that Teraphim were built and composed after the position of certain planets, those which the Greeks called, can't read Greek, and according to the figures that were located in the sky called, can't read Greek, or the tutelary gods. Those who traced out the were called, or the diviners of the Teraphim. I wish I could read other languages. It is such sentences, however, in the Nabatean agriculture that have frightened the men of science and made them proclaim the work either apocrypha or fairy tale, unworthy of the notice of an academician. At the same time as shown, zealous Roman Catholics and Protestants tore it metaphorically into pieces, the former because it described the worship of demons, the later because it is ungodly. They are all wrong once more. It is not a fairy tale, and as far as regards pious churchmen, the same worship may be shown in the scriptures, however disfigured by translation. Solar and lunar worship, as well as of the stars and elements, are traced and figured in the Christian theology. Dependent by Baptists, they are stoutly denied by the Protestants only at their own risk and peril. 2 instances may be given. Marcellinus teaches that ancient divinations were always accomplished by the help of spirits of the elements. But it is found now that the planets of elements and zodiac were figured not only in Heligopos by the 12 stones called mysteries of the elements, Elementorium Arcana, but also in Solomon's Temple, and as pointed out by various writers in several old Italian churches and even Notre Dame de Paris, where they can be seen to this day. No symbol, the sun included, was more complex in its manifold meanings than the lunar symbol. The sex was, of course, dual. With some, it was male, the Hindu king Soma, and Chaldean Sin. With other nations, it was female and beauteous goddess Diana Lucinia. In Taurus, human victims were sacrificed to Artemis, a form of lunar goddess, and the Cretans called her Dictynia, totally butchering that, and the Mendes and Persians Enitis is shown by inscription of Chloe. Again, guys, anyway, but we are now concerned chiefly with the most chaste and pure of the virgin goddesses, Luna Artemis, to whom Pamphios was the first to give the surname. Again, I can't read that. And whom Hippolytus wrote, thus Artemis Lochia, the goddess that presided at conception and childbirth, is in her functions and as the triple Hecate, the Orphic deity, the predecessor of the god of rabbins and pre-Christian Kabbalists and his lunar type. The goddess was personified symbol of the various and successive aspects represented by the moon in each of her three phases. An interpretation was already that of the Stoics, while the Orpheans explained that epithet by three kings of nature over which she reigned: jealous, bloodthirsty, ravageful, and exciting. Hecate Luna is a worthy counterpart of the jealous god of the Hebrew prophets. The whole riddle of the solar and lunar worship, as now traced in the churches, hangs indeed on this world-old mystery of lunar phenomena. The correlative forces in the Queen of Night that lie latent for the modern science, but are fully active in the knowledge of Eastern adepts, explain well the 1,001 images under which the moon was represented by the ancients. It also shows how much more profoundly learned in the Selenic mysteries were the ancients that then are now our modern astronomers. The whole pantheon of the lunar gods and goddesses, neophytes or Neith, Proserpina, Sibyl, Isis, Venus, and Hecate on the one hand, and Apollo, Dionysus, Adonis, Bacchus, Osiris, Thammuz on the other, all show on their face of their names and titles, those of sons and husbands of their mothers, their identity with the Christian Trinity. In every religious system, the gods were made to merge their functions as father, son, and husband into one, and the goddesses were identified as wife, mother, and sister, or the male god, the former synthesizing the human attributes as the son, the giver of life, the latter merging all other titles in the grand synthesis known as Maya Maria, a generic name. Mia, in its forced derivation, has come to mean with the Greeks mother from the root ma, nurse, and even give its name to the month of May, which was sacred to all those goddesses before it became consecrated to Mary. Its primitive meaning, however, was Maya, Durga, translated from the Orientalists as inaccessible, but meaning in truth the unreachable, in the sense of illusion and unreality, as being the source and cause of spells, the personification of illusions. And I put a tiny pause there. I have having my door swinging open back and forth. I have a lot of buggies and they're flying and biting me. So I decided to take my little bug zapper and put it over there so I am not bothered by other things. So something just got fried. And I send it in the love and light of the one infinite creator. And if my winter spiders are around, they could eat those things, but they're not doing their jobs. Anywho, in religious rites, the moon served as dual purpose, personified as a female goddess for esoteric purposes, or as a male god in allegory and symbol. In occult philosophy, our satellite was regarded as a sexless potency to be well studied because it was to be dreaded. With the initiated Aryans, Kahaldi, the Greeks and Romans, Soma, Sin, Artemis, the hermaphrodite Apollo, whose attribute is the lyre, and bearded Diana of the bow and arrow. Duos Lunos, and especially Osiris Lunus, and Thoth Lunius, were the occult potencies of the moon, but whether male or female, whether Thoth or Minerva, Soma or Asaroth, the moon is the occult mystery of mysteries, and more a symbol of evil than of good. Her 7 phases, originally esoteric division, are divided into 3 astronomical phenomena and 4 pure psychic phases. That the moon was not always reverenced shown in the mysteries, in which the death of the moon god, the 3 phases of gradual waning and final disappearance, was allegoricized by the moon standing for the genius of evil that triumphs for the time over the light and life-giving god, the sun. And all the skill and learning of the ancient hierophants and magic was required to turn this triumph into a defeat. It was the most ancient worship of all, that of the 3rd race of our round, the hermaphrodites, to whom the male moon became sacred when, after the fall, so-called the sexes had become separated. Deus Lunus then became an androgyny, male and female, in turn to serve finally the purposes of sorcery as a dual power to the 4th root race, the Atlanteans. With the 5th, our own, the lunar solar worship, divided the nations into 2 distinct antagonistic camps. It's led to events described aeons later in the Mahabharata war, which to Europeans is the fabulous, to the Hindus and occultists the historical strife between the Suryavanas and the Indo-Vryanas, orienting in the dual aspect of the moon the worship of the female and the male principles respectively, and ended in distinct solar and lunar cults. Among the Semitic races, the sun was for a very long time feminine and the moon masculine, the latter notion being adopted by them from the Atlantean traditions. The moon was called the Lord of the Sun, Bel Shemesh, before Shemesh worship. The ignorance of the incipient reasons for such a distinction and occult principles led the nations into anthropomorphic idol worship. But the religion of every ancient nation had been primarily based on the occult manifestations of a purely abstract force or principle, now called God. The very establishment of such worship shows in its detail and rites that philosophers who evolved those systems of nature, subjective and objective, possessed profound knowledge and were acquainted with many facts of a scientific nature. For besides being purely occult, the rites of lunar worship were based on, as just shown, upon a knowledge of physiology, quite a modern science with us, psychology, sacred mathematics, geometry, meteorology, in their right applications to symbols and figures, which are but glyphs recording observed nature and scientific facts. In short, upon a most minute and profound knowledge of nature. Lunar magnetism generates life, preserves and kills it. Soma embodies the triple power of the Trimurti, though it passes unrecognized by the profane to this day. The allegory that makes Soma the moon produced by the churning of the oceans of life, space, by the gods, another Manvarata, in the progenic day of our planetary system, and that other allegory which shows the rishis milking the earth, whose calf was Soma, the moon, has a deep cosmographical meaning, for it's neither our earth which is milked, nor was the moon which we know the calf. Had our wise men of science known as much of the mysteries of nature as the ancient Aryans did, they would surely never have imagined that the moon was projected from the earth. Right there. Wow. Wow. Once more, the oldest of permutations is theogony, the son becoming his own father and mother generated by the son, has to be remembered and taken into consideration of the symbolical language of the ancients is to be understood by us. Otherwise, mythology will be ever haunting the Orientalists as simply the disease which springs up at a peculiar stage of human culture, as Renoff gravely observes in a Hybrid lecture. The ancients taught the, so to speak, auto-generation of the gods, the one divine essence unmanifested, perpetually begetting a second self-manifested, which second self androgynous in its nature gives birth in an immaculate way to every micro and macrocosmical in the universe. This was shown in the circle and the diameter, or the sacred 10 a few pages back. But our Orientalists, their extreme desire to discover one homogeneous element in nature notwithstanding, will see it. Cramped in their researches by such ignorance, they, the Arianists and Egyptologists, are constantly led astray from the truth in their speculations. Thus, De Rouge is unable to understand in the text which he translates the meaning of Amun-Ra, saying the king Amenophis supposed to be Memnon. Thou art my son, I have begotten thee. And as he finds the same idea in many texts and under various forms, this very Christian Orientalist is finally compelled to exclaim that for this idea to have entered the mind of a hierogrammatist, there must have been in their religion a more or less defined doctrine, indicating as a possible fact that might come to pass a divine and immaculate incarnation under a human form. Precisely. But why throw the explanation on an impossible prophecy when the whole secret is explained by a later religion copying the earlier? That doctrine was universal, and it was not the mind of any one hierogrammaticist that evolved it, for the Indian avatars are a proof to the contrary, after which, having come to realize clearer what the divine father and son were with the Egyptians, De Rouge still fails to account for and perceive that what were the functions attributed to the feminine principles in the primordial generation. He does not find it in the goddess Neith of Sais, yet he quotes the sentence of the commander to Cambyses when introducing the king into the Saitic temple. I made known to his majesty the dignity of Sais, which is the abode of Neith, the great female producer of the son, who is the firstborn and who is not begotten, but only brought forth, and hence is the fruit of the Immaculate Mother. How much more grandiose, philosophical, and poetical is the real distinction of, and for whoever is able to understand and appreciate it, made between the Immaculate Virgin of ancient pagans and the modern papal conception. With the former, that ever youthful Mother Nature, the antitype of her prototypes, the sun and moon, generates and brings forth her mind-born son and the universe. The sun and moon, as male and female deities, fructify the earth, the microcosmical mother, and the later conceives and brings forth in her turn. With the Christians, the firstborn is indeed generated, begotten, and positively conceived and brought forth, explains the Latin Church. Thus she drags down the noble spiritual ideal of the Virgin Mary to the earth, and making her of the earthly, degrades the idea to the lowest of the anthropomorphic goddess of the rabble. Truly, Neith, Isis, Diana were each of them a demiurgical goddess, at once visible and invisible, having her place in heaven and helping to the generation of species. The moon, in short, her occult aspects and powers are numberless, and in one of them, the moon becomes, with the Egyptian Hathor, another aspect of Isis, and both of these goddesses are shown suckling Horus. Both in the Egyptian Hall of the British Museum, Hathor, worshipped by Pharaoh Thutmose, who stands between her and the Lord of Heavens. The monolith was taken from Karnak, and the same goddess has the following legend inscribed on her throne: the divine mother and lady or queen of heaven, also the morning star and the light of the sea. All the lunar goddesses had a dual aspect, one divine, the other infernal. All were the virgin mothers of an immaculately born son, the sun. Sun. Raoul Rochetti shows the moon goddess of the Athenians, Phallus, or Sibyl, Minerva, or again Diana, holding her child on the child's son on the lap, invoked in her festivals as Greek whatever, the one mother of God, sitting on a lion and surrounded by 12 personages, in whom the occultist recognizes the 12 great gods, and the pious Christian Orientalist, the apostles, or rather the Greek and pagan prophecy thereof. Interesting. You know, guys, this is long, and I do apologize. My voice is fading. We're almost done. Thank goodness. Gotta love her. They are both right, for the Immaculate Goddess of the Latin Church is a faithful copy of the old pagan goddess. The number 12 of the apostles is that of the 12 tribes, and the later are a personification of the 12 great gods and of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Every detail, almost in the Christian dogma, is borrowed from the heathens. Semele, the wife of Jupiter and mother of Bacchus, the sun, is, according to Lunus, also carried or made to ascend to heaven after her death, where she presides between Mars and Venus under the name of Queen of the World or the Universe, at the names of which, as at the names of Hathor, Hecate, and other infernal goddesses, tremble all the demons. This Greek inscription on a small temple, reproduced on a stone that was found by somebody and copied by Mount Falcon, as de Merville tells us, informs us of the stupendous fact that the Magna Marta of the old world was impudent plagiarism, permeated by the demon of the Immaculate Virgin Mother of his church. Whether so or vice versa is of no importance. That which is interesting to note, the perfect identity between the archaic copy and modern original. Did space permit, we might show the inconceivable coolness and unconcern exhibited by certain followers of the Roman Catholic Church when made to face the revelations of the past. To Maury's remark that the Virgin took possession of all sanctuaries of Ceres and Venus, and that the pagan rites proclaimed and practiced in honor of those goddesses were in a good measure transferred to the Mother of Christ, the Advocate of Rome answers that such is the fact, and that it is just as it should be and quite natural. As a dogma, the liturgy and the rites professed by the Roman Apostolic Church in 1862 are found engraved on monuments inscribed on papyri and cylinders hardly posterior to the deluge. It does seem impossible to deny the existence of the first anti-historical Roman Catholicism, of which our own is but the faithful continuation, but which, and while the former was culmination, the summum of the impudence of demons and goetic necromancy, the latter is divine. If in our own, the moon under the feet has been nothing more than a sorry guys, I hate italics. But while the former was the culmination of the impudence of demons and goetic necromancy, the latter is divine. If in our Christian revelation, Mary, clothed with the sun and having the moon under her feet, has nothing more in common with the humble servant of Nazareth, it is because she has now become the greatest of theological and cosmological powers in our universe. Verily so, since Pindar's hymns to Minerva, who sits at the right hand of her father Jupiter, who is more powerful than all other angels or gods, are likewise applied to the Virgin. It is Saint Bernard, who, quoted by Cornelius of Lapidide, is made to address the Virgin Mary in this wise: the Son Christ lives in thee, and thou livest in him. Sermon on the Holy Virgin. Again, the Virgin is admitted to be the moon by the same unsophisticated holy man, being the Lucina of the church, and is the childbirth applied to her. Like the moon, the Virgin is the queen of heaven, adds the innocent saint. This settles the question the more similarly, according to such writers as de Merville. There exists between the pagan conceptions and the Christian dogmas, the more divine appears the Christian religion, and the more it seemed to be the only true inspired one, especially in the Roman Catholic form. The unbelieving scientists and academia, who think they see in the Latin Church quite the opposite of the divine inspiration, and who will not believe in the satanic tricks of plagiarism by anticipation, are severely taken to ask. But then they believe nothing. They believe in nothing and reject even the Nabathean agriculture as romance, and a pack of superstitious nonce, complains the memorialists. In their perverted opinion, idol of the moon and the statue of the Madonna are one. A noble marquise wrote 20 years ago 6 huge volumes, or as he calls them, memoirs, to the French Academy, with the sole object of showing Roman Catholicism as an inspired and revealed faith. As proof thereof, he furnishes numberless facts, all trending to show that the entire ancient world, ever since the deluge, had been, with the help of the devil, systematically plagiarizing the rites, ceremonies, and dogmas of future Holy Church, to be born ages later. What would be the faithful son of Rome have said had he heard his co-religionist M. Renouf, the distinguished Egyptologist of British Museum, declaring in one of his learned lectures that neither Hebrews nor Greeks borrowed any of their ideas from Egypt. But perhaps it is just this that M. Renouf intended to say, namely, that it is the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Aryans who borrowed theirs from the Latin Church. And if so, why in the name of logic do the papists reject the additional information which the occultists may give them on moon worship, since it all tends to show their Roman Catholic worship as old as the world of, I don't know how to read that word, and astrology. The reason of early Christian and later Roman Catholic astrolatry, or the symbolical worship of sun and moon, identical with that of the Gnostics, though less philosophical and pure than the sun worship of the Zoroastrians, is a natural consequence of its birth and origin. The adoption by the Latin Church of such symbols as the water, fire, sun, moon, and stars, and a good many other things, is simply a continuation by the early Christians of the old worship of pagan nations. Thus, Odin got his wisdom, power, and knowledge by sitting at the feet of Mimir, the thrice wise Fortune, who passed his life by the fountain of primeval wisdom, the crystalline waters of which increase his knowledge daily. Mimir drew the highest knowledge from the fountain, because the world was born of water. Hence, primeval wisdom was to be found in that mysterious element. Asgard and the gods. The eye which Odin had to pledge to acquire that knowledge may be the sun, which enlightens and penetrates all things. His other eye being the moon, which reflection gazes out of the deep, which at last, when setting, sinks into the ocean. But it is something more besides this. Loki, the fire god, is said to have hidden in the water as well as in the moon the light giver, whose reflection he found therein, and he's believed that the fire finds refuge in the water was not limited to the old Scandinavians. It was shared by all nations and was finally taken up by the early Christians, who symbolized the Holy Ghost under the shape of fire. Cloven tongues like as fire, the breath of the Father, Son. This fire descends also into the water of the sea. Mary. The dove was a symbol of the soul with the several nations. It was sacred to Venus, the goddess born under the sea foam, and it became later the symbol of Christian Animu Mundi, or the Holy Spirit. One of the most occult chapters in the Book of the Dead is entitled "To Make the Transformation into God Giving Light to the Path of Darkness," wherein the woman light of the shadow serves Thoth in his retreat into the moon. Thoth Hermes is said to hide therein because he is the representative of secret wisdom. He is the manifested logos of the light side, the concealed deity of the dark wisdom, when he is supposed to retire to the opposite hemisphere. Speaking of her power, the moon calls herself repeatedly the light which shineth in darkness, the woman light. Hence, it became the accepted symbol of all the Virgin Mother goddesses. As the wicked evil spirits warred against the moon in days of yore, so they were supposed to war now without being able to prevail, however, against the actual Queen of Heaven, Mary, the moon. Hence, also the moon was intimately connected in all the pagan theogonies with the dragon, her eternal enemy, the Virgin or Madonna standing on the mythical Satan, under that form, crushed and made powerless under her feet. This because the head and tail of a dragon, which represented in Eastern astronomy, to this day, the ascending and descending nodes of the moon were also symbolized in ancient Greek by the two serpents. Hercules kills them on the day of his birth, and so does the babe in his Virgin Mother's arms. As Mr. Gerald Massey aptly observes in the connection, all such symbols figured their own facts from the first and did not prefigure others of a totally different order. The iconography and dogmas, too, had survived in Rome from the period remotely pre-Christian. There was neither forgery nor interpolation of types, nothing but a continuity of imagery with a perversion of its meanings, end quote. My goodness, that was long, horrible. Sorry, that was horrible for me. It was really rough. My throat is really, really dry, and as much water as I consume, it doesn't matter. That was a lot of butchery too, so I do apologize. I love her work, and even reading it without even talking it is difficult. Just can't read Greek or some Latin. Fun times. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. It just keeps getting better, though. I mean, the topic is absolutely amazing to really dive into. Her perspective is pretty spot on a lot of these topics, especially the moon, calendars, days of the week. A lot of people have an issue with a lot of that stuff. So this is really good to like reference into. So next time we'll read the tree, serpent, and crocodile worship. That should be pretty interesting. As The Secret Teaching of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, we're tackling a lot of the same things. A lot of the same things they're paralleling. So check his stuff out because it bounces off of her stuff. It bounces off of his stuff. So until next time, guys, sending each and every one of you protection, light, love, and shielding. Please have an amazing rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.